Welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast, where it's all about fixing your relationship without your man's conscious effort so you feel desired, taken care of, and special, even if your relationship feels completely hopeless. I'm Laura Doyle, and today I'm talking about 3 questions to ask before you divorce. My guest, Lucia, was tired of being lonely when her husband came home late and drunk so many nights, but she knew something really had to change when she found a flirty note from another woman in her husband's pants pockets when she was 8 months pregnant. But today, her husband comes home to his wife early and sober, and they laugh and chat easily every day and spend a lot of time cuddling. What happened? She's going to describe exactly what she did to get a much better response from her husband so you can do it too. And then I'll be giving out the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award, which is just common knowledge, really, or it would be if it weren't actually true. Time to bust this popular and false myth. All that is coming up. But first, let's talk about 3 questions to ask before you divorce. Ending your marriage is a huge decision. And if it's a question you're considering, it's probably weighed pretty heavily on you for a long time. And that's very tiring. Nobody considers divorce unless they're really hurting, unless they're really hopeless that things will ever get better. Of course, you'd like answers. What's the best path? Which choice will make you happier in the long run? No expert can tell you what's right for you. Only you know if it's best for you to end your marriage. But that doesn't mean you need to make such a big decision all alone. Here are 3 questions to ask yourself before you decide to divorce. They'll help you get clarity and maybe even find the wisdom you need at such a tough and scary time. 1, ask yourself, am I happy? Am I happy may seem like an easy question to answer. Like, of course you're not. You wouldn't be contemplating breaking up your family if you were happy, right? You have lots of reasons to feel unhappy, which is why it seems so contrary even to ask this. The reason I ask is because I was once very unhappy in my marriage too, and I felt that it was because my husband wasn't doing a good job making me happy. But it turns out I just wasn't good at being happy myself. In fact, when I first tried to make myself happy every day, I had no idea where to start. I just didn't know what made me happy. I was resigned to having obligations, like too much work, too many bills, too much housework, too much responsibility. And I thought that's how life was. And I just had to suck it up and slog through somehow. But thankfully, I was completely wrong. When I started prioritizing my own delight over working more, I felt so much lighter and more joyful. If I had divorced in search of that feeling, I would have had a rude awakening that I still wasn't very happy. This question is worth seriously asking yourself because it turns out only happy people have happy relationships. How could you make yourself happy in spite of the circumstances in your marriage? If you do divorce, of course, you'll be the one making yourself happy then. Why not start now? Let's just see how that looks. Of course, it may not solve all your relationship problems. I get that. It didn't solve all of mine either. But getting happy was the indispensable first step to having the playful, passionate marriage I have now. Number 2, are you angry? Here's another deceptively easy question. Are you angry? Of course you're angry. I know, because I was furious when I was on the verge of ending my marriage. And although I didn't go through with it, part of me wanted to file for divorce, not just to escape the pain of interacting with my husband, but also to make him hurt too. I'm not proud to admit that I wanted to show him how it felt to be rejected and abandoned. Because the truth is that under all that anger, I was hurt, very hurt. My anger was a cover for my hurt. I felt safer being livid than I did admitting I was devastated that he wanted nothing to do with me and only wanted to watch TV. It was much scarier to admit I was hurt than to defend myself with a snappy insult. But when I finally did respond like a mere mortal woman instead of a human steamroller, I was amazed at how much better my husband responded to me. Instead of swiping back and forth at each other, I saw him respond with protection. I saw him offer comfort when I revealed my vulnerability by saying, ouch, when I felt hurt. These days, I know that when I'm mad, it means I'm hurt. I'm hurt. And hurt is a much more connecting feeling than snippy retorts. I also know it has never been my husband's intention to hurt me, with the key word being intention. I mean, we live so close together that sometimes we hurt each other accidentally. My first response is still to get mad at times, but then I can ask myself if maybe I'm hurt underneath. And so far, the answer has always been yes. Keeping in mind that he didn't mean to do it, just like he didn't mean to step on my foot last week, that helps me recover from the hurt without having to air a grievance to him, which can create defensiveness. Number 3 question: have I cleaned up my side of this street? Of course, you're noticing that your man has shortcomings and how painful they are to live with. That was my experience also. I couldn't take his detachment and his inattentiveness for one more day. But as with every story, there are 2 sides. When my marriage was at its lowest point, I wasn't very dignified. And I told my husband he was so negative, which is a rather negative thing to say. And I criticized him for being critical. I blamed him for blaming me. I told him he wasn't very spiritually evolved, which wasn't very spiritually evolved. I said a lot of mean, ugly things. I rolled my eyes in disgust and complained incessantly. Those are not qualities I aspire to, and I didn't feel good hearing myself say those things. In other words, my side of the street, it was a mess. It needed plenty of cleaning, but I didn't know any other way to be. I wasn't aware I had another option except to find fault. Something told me, though, that I'd be taking myself with myself whenever I went anywhere, even into a new relationship after I got divorced, and that some of those less appealing qualities might go along with me unless I improved the only person I could, me. I'm unspeakably grateful that I got the 6 intimacy skills and got to experience the connection framework, which is how I learned and practiced. It's the best personal development program I've ever undertaken. And without my broken marriage to practice them in, I'm not sure I would have ever gotten the miracle of feeling so confident and calm and dignified, not to mention loved and adored every single day just for being me. It's something I wish every woman who wants to could experience. And I know of no better way to get there than starting out wondering, should I get a divorce? If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. My guest, Lucia, was tired of being lonely when her husband came home late and drunk so many nights. But she knew something really had to change when she found a flirty note from another woman in her husband's pants pocket when she was 8 months pregnant. But today, her husband comes home to his wife early and sober, and they laugh and chat easily every day and spend a lot of time cuddling. She's going to describe exactly what she did to get a much better response from her husband so you can do it too. Lucia, welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, great. Well, take us back to the bad old days. What were things like in your marriage?
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to bring it way back to when we first met. I was really young. I was 17, And I just fell head over heels for him for so many reasons. But he was just so much fun and just such a good person. So generous and kind. Um, Now he came from another country, and he grew up very poor. So he didn't have the same opportunities that I have, but I never really thought gave that much thought. I just was totally in love with him. Now, a few years passed, we were dating, and I didn't really realize the disparities between us until I went to college. And I had a lot of friends that were dating doctors, pharmacy students, surgeons, all kinds of. And that was when I started to really notice the disparity between my boyfriend at the time. And that didn't change how I felt about him, but it became something that I noticed. So when we got married, I just assumed that I would need to pick up the role of leader because I grew up in America. I spoke fluent English. I had my bachelor's degree, and he didn't have any of that. And again, that didn't make me feel like a better person per se, but it did make me feel like, okay, I'm going to have to pick up the reins here and teach him how we adult in America. So I felt like I had to teach him about 401k,
Oh,
savings, health insurance, all of that. So the years passed, and I start taking control in every area. I assumed that I was supposed to. But of course, over the years, he just became more and more and more distant until eventually I just felt myself having no one to talk to. I mean, at home. And I just felt really lonely and really sad. And I had no idea why. I felt like I was the best wife and I had no idea how to improve or even that it was up to me to improve. I just felt really lonely and didn't know why. And I had looked up a lot of, oh my gosh, I had read so many marriage books, but all of them were, by psychologists or marriage counselors or therapists, and they sounded great. And I would take so many notes. But when it came to applying them, they would make him even more distant. And
oh.
so I was putting in so much effort and not getting anywhere. So, yeah, those were the bad old days. I was just really lonely. I used to cry a lot. I used to tell my friends, and they would give me very well meaning advice, but it would, similar to the books, just keep getting me lonely. So
What
that's
kind
where I.
what kinds of advice were you getting from your friends and from those psychologists that was kind of backfiring on you?
Okay, so the advice was different. In the books, a lot of times it would say, okay, this is what the woman needs to do, but then also this is what the man needs to do. He needs his phone is completely available to you. So I tell him, this book says that your phone needs to be available to me all the time. And he'd be like, oh, okay. So things like that. It was just even more control on him. And then from my friends, a lot of my friends are also from other countries, so they would say
Mhm.
things that hadn't even crossed my mind before. Like when I mentioned, "Oh, he comes home late at night." I should say his job, he works at a restaurant, so he comes home late regardless. But at the time, to avoid me, his controlling wife, he would stay late with his friends, and he'd come home much later than he really needed to. So my friends would say, "Oh no, you need to put a stop to that. Tell him he can't do that anymore, or lock him out, or." I just felt like it was my job to make sure that he behaved, and of course, it didn't work.
Yeah. So did you tell him he needed to come home on time?
Oh, yes. I used to wait up for him and I'd be so tired and grumpy. So by the time he came home,
Oh,
I had a handful of things to say. And, I would just wave my finger and tell him everything I thought about him. So that was what he was coming home to. So naturally, he'd come home later and later.
yeah. And it's easy to see it now, but at the time, you probably really had no idea why that was going so badly, sounds like.
Right. Yes. And I used to make up so many stories in my head to torture myself. Like, I tell myself, oh, his coworkers, I'm sure he has some really pretty coworkers. he's probably drinking with them and he's flirting. And I just made up all these stories. And so by the time he came home, I was heartbroken, not just angry, but really sad because I was torturing myself with these hypothetical stories that I don't even know why I made them up, but I did.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, right? We can sometimes worry about things regardless of whether we have evidence for them or not. So, and you were still in charge of, you were handling all the finances at your house. Is that right?
Yes. And actually, by the time I finally found your book, I devoured it within an hour. And I remember I was walking my dog reading it or I listening to it because I did the audio version. And I took another round around the town just so I could listen to it one more time before going back. So I listened to it twice in one day. And I started immediately putting almost everything to work. But the one that I said, oh, that's not for me, is the finances, giving up the finance control over the finances. I said, that one's not for women like me. You know, my husband doesn't have the same education or the same experiences. So there's no way. So I
Right.
held on to that one.
Oh,
And have
yeah.
to say, I did see some improvement for sure. I did it for 2 years without giving up control of the finances. But when finally I had the last straw and decided, no, I need to go all in, that was when I really saw change, real, intense change. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to say they do kind of work together because I was still holding on to control and a big part of control because finance is a huge part of life and it can get in the way of peace if you're still just holding on to all that fear.
Yeah. That's well put. So, what was there? Was there a moment that you said, okay, we can't go on like this? Like something really has to change in my marriage?
Yeah, so I was pregnant with my first child, and because I was in charge of the finances, I told myself, okay, I want to have a good savings to welcome this baby with, of course, like nesting. So I was working 6 days a week,
Oh,
full days from 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And then I was doing Uber until 11 at night p.m. trying to
oh,
get this money saved up.
and making it
And
life.
meanwhile,
Mm.
I was still cooking and cleaning too. Oh my gosh, I was such a resentful mess.
Oh, yeah.
And meanwhile, he kept his same schedule. And I was, expecting him to rev up his hours too, but he didn't. And on top of all of this, he at this point was very addicted to an online game that used money. So we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. A lot of money was being drained away into this game. And we at this point kept our finances separate. So I actually didn't know. And when I found out, it was because I had asked him, how much savings do you have for the baby? And so I ended up going into his account to see what was going on. And I noticed just thousands and thousands, week after week, going into this game.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, actually, I can see, and it makes me really sad for him, that this was like his own little online fantasy world where he felt like he was good at something because I was making him feel like he was awful at everything. So, I was so frustrated. All I could think of at the time was the money, but now I can see that he was just really sad and he needed that escape. So, um, I come to be 8 months pregnant. I'm feeling very vulnerable, very huge. Your body hurts. I was just a grumpy mess all the time. And I was doing laundry and, I was emptying the pockets to make sure there was no change in the pockets. And I found a note from another woman and it was very flirty. And I recognized the handwriting because I'd actually been to his job a lot of times because it's right down the street from where we work. And I had always noticed this girl was very, very flirty with him. And then when she'd see me, she'd get all serious. So I always, from like years back, had kind of had my eye on her. So I started looking through his phone and everything, and then I just blew up on him and was really hurt and really upset. And that was when I said, well, no, that was when I put everything on him. I thought everything's his fault. He's awful. I'm doing everything. But then I took a long walk with the dog. That's like my therapy. And I pulled out the book again and was listening. And I realized, maybe there's something more that I can do. So that was when I finally said, I'm going to give my all to these skills, including letting go control of the finances. And that really, that was the start. That was the real start of my journey with the skills.
So for you, it sounds like the finances was really kind of the crux of things. I consider it like a graduate level skill to relinquish control of the finances. And you had already started practicing skills. It sounds like you'd read the book, and you were doing some things differently than you had been doing.
Um, I thought I was pretty good at them, but no.
Okay.
So I was trying to be more aware, but I hadn't really gone all out. There's a difference with how much awareness you choose to have, really.
Yes, yes, and it's a kind of a painful moment, really. It's a very painful process, I guess you'd say. It kind of comes in waves, right? When you realize, like, oh, I was causing myself some of this heartache.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you had some awareness, and then you got more awareness as you got this at this moment where you're finding this note in his pocket.
Yes, and that note was just really painful, especially because when we first started dating, the way that we would communicate was through notes because we used to work together. We were coworkers and we'd pass notes. So to find him passing notes to his coworker, oh, that really got me. Because it was the same kind of like her own little inside memory was now shared with someone else. So he swore up and down that was it. It was just flirting. So, we women have a strong gut. My gut tells me that he was telling me the truth. So we moved forward from that. But nonetheless, it was a very hurtful day. And then I do have to say, letting go of the finances was so terrifying because I was giving handing them over this huge responsibility, especially now that we had a baby coming, to someone who was addicted, very addicted to an expensive online game where tens of thousands of dollars were drained out to. So I was so terrified. But I told myself what you say in the books, this is just try it out, do it as an experiment. You can always take things back if you need to. So that really gave me the courage to try it out. And I realized in myself, though, that I hadn't been able to take that step because I didn't think he was capable. And he read that in me. He knew I didn't think he was capable. And that made him feel very doubtful of himself. So when I believed in him enough to give it over, he took it and he ran with it.
Wow.
He's just blown me away. Not only was he able to pay off all the debt that he had with the game, he saved up enough for a down payment for a house. So we've now moved into our first home.
Wow.
We had the savings for the kids. He's now set up himself college savings accounts for the kids.
Oh.
And not only do I not drive Uber anymore, but I cut down from working 6 days a week to 3 half days. So I now get to be home with the kids 4 days a week. And he does all of this with a smile, just full of joy. He's never complained that he works so many hours or that he's in charge of it because he's proud to do so. It's amazing. And I tell him all the time, thank you so much. I love our home. And I love spending time with the kids and being home with them all these hours. And it's just, if someone had told me that giving up control of the finances was going to bring us to where we are today, I wouldn't have believed it. It's really amazing. And of course, all of the other skills all help in union. They all build on each other, but that was the big one that I was most fearful about, and the hardest one for me to put to work.
And
Yeah.
when you were first experimenting with it, and you were feeling so afraid, how did you overcome that? Like, how did you decide, like, well, this is I'm going to try it anyway?
It was hard because he he made some decisions at first that made me really upset. Like when I first, I think it was maybe 2 weeks after I had handed everything over to him, he bought a dirt bike that was a few $1,000s, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're about to have a baby. What are you thinking?" And I did let him know what I was thinking, and then after I apologized. Well, I always this is why I love the podcast, Laura, because every time I ran into trouble, um, I would listen to the book. So I must have listened to your book probably 30 times. So it's so nice to have the podcast because now it's the same skills but with new stories. So it's
Yes,
something different.
yes.
Yeah. So I would plug that in, and that would kind of give me the power to say, okay, I can do this. Just breathe deep. What matters most to me right now and in my life, my biggest priority is to have a happy family. I care
Mm.
more about my relationship than I do, with money. Even if worst case scenario, he gets us into horrible debt. That would be awful, of course. But I'll have a united family. So
Wow.
that would be, of course, the worst case scenario. But I told myself, no, I trust him. I fell in love with him for a reason. He's a smart man. He's not going to do that to us. And of course, he didn't. He surpassed my expectations times a million.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
had been saving for a house when you were controlling the money, right?
kind of. I had been trying, but because we're separated in finances,
Yeah.
every time I got a savings going, um, he was in debt. So it didn't really even out.
Okay. Yeah.
No.
So you'd been trying for a few years to get that down payment for the
Mhm.
house, and then you relinquished control of the finances, and he was able to do it much quicker because the two of
Within
you within months. Within months.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. That's a it's a great example of choosing your faith over your fear, Lucia, which I love, right? Because you had lots of evidence with the expensive game, that this was going to be a bad idea, and you just really focused on how smart he is, and why you chose him, and that helped you make that. Yeah, some people probably thought that would be a crazy leap. Probably have people advising you against doing that.
Right. Oh, everyone. And, you know, I think he had a lot of self-doubt anyways because he was very aware himself. He Like I said before, he grew up very poor in a very rural area of another country. So he is very aware of his strong accent. He still feels a little uncomfortable with English, although he speaks it very well. Um, he did not go to high school even, let alone college. He really had a lot going against him. So he always had his own self doubt. So to have me doubt him also must have just flattened his self confidence completely. And then when I believed in him, that gave him the confidence to be able to believe in himself. And he's done so well. He makes me so proud.
Wow, it sounds like a miracle. It
Yeah,
does.
it really
Wow.
is.
So what? How did he respond to these other? Well, it wasn't just the finances, right? You were implementing other skills. Like, you apologized for being disrespectful about the dirt bike. It sounds like. Is that right?
Yes. Apologies. When I apologize, it makes him seem in the moment a little uncomfortable. I probably because he's not used to it. So he'll just kind of be quiet. But then, later be like, oh, he'll move on. Whereas before I would just get ignored for days, sometimes even a week or two. So I don't get ignored anymore. He'll get over whatever happened. 5 minutes later, he's just over it. So
Wow.
that's really helpful.
And and what's your relationship like now?
Oh my gosh, it's awesome. I have a little, well, of course, I struggle a little bit with all of the skills, but there's one that I realized just recently. Because sometimes I say, oh, I'm getting really good at the skills. And then I realize, oh, I still need to really work and stay aware because they can sneak up on you. um, just recently, well, we just moved into our house in November. So we still have all our walls are pretty bare. So he came home, but I have to say I like it though. I'm a minimalist at heart. So
Mhm.
I don't like to see visual clutter at all. So my husband came home with a massive painting that he found. I don't know if it was a garage sale or something. And I saw it and I said, "Oh gosh, he's going to start cluttering up the house." And so I put the painting in the basement. And he saw that I put it in the basement. He said, "Oh, you didn't like the painting?" I was like, not really. I kind of like not having any visual clutter." And then, I walked away and he was like, "All right, whatever." And then I was thinking about it and I was like, "Oh, that was really rude." He's trying to give me something and I didn't receive it.
Mm.
So I went down and I looked at it again and I said, I started to feel really guilty. So I told him, "You know what? The more I look at it, it's really growing on me. I'd like to hang it up." So he perked up and said, "Oh, great." Because that painting, I saw it and it immediately reminded me of you because Newport, that's in Rhode Island, it's a beach that I love. He said, "It looks just like Newport, and Newport is your favorite place." And it reminded me of you. And I said, "Oh, that was so sweet." So now I walk by this massive painting in my hallway every day, and it's a visual reminder that he's thinking about me and that he loves me. And this painting that at first I didn't like now makes me so happy. And I walk by just to look at it sometimes and it makes my day. And I'm like, wow, I was this close to missing that had had that skill not popped back into my head. I was very close to missing out on that. And that poor painting would have been rotting away in the basement.
Wow, that's beautiful. You did a beautiful job receiving graciously. You kind of didn't at first, but you caught yourself, and it sounds like it created some wonderful intimacy between you and your husband.
Yeah, so it's
Mhm.
great. So also I have to say he still works at his late job, so he does still come home a little bit late, but nowhere near as late as before. And I'm not texting him constantly, "What are you doing? When are you coming home?" I don't do that anymore. I trust that he'll come home when he can. And meanwhile, I make myself a cup of tea and I do some yoga or I read a book, I relax and I enjoy my time. So when he does come home, he opens the door and finds me happy and relaxed and calm. And then we sit on the couch and watch some TV and we cuddle every day. It's just so I know that when he comes home he's happy because it's comforting and he's safe here and I don't worry anymore at all. I don't make up stories. I just relax and I know that I can trust him and I know that he comes home as soon as he can.
So, how did you stop making up those stories? Because I think that can be kind of hard to give up, right? This,
Yes, it was really hard. So I was doing the skills on my own for a few years. My daughter, when I started this, I was 8 months pregnant with my first daughter. She's now 3.5 years old. So this past summer, so she was a little under 3 at the time. I felt like I was kind of going back and making up stories a little bit. So I said, you know what, I need a little more support here. So I signed up for the Ridiculously Happy Wife program. And that helped me immensely in so many ways because not only was it a place where I could vent to other ladies that are on the same journey as I am, and they could really help me get out of my head and get out of making those stories up for myself. But also, it really helped me take my skills to a whole new level and learn how to stack the skills. And they just became so much more sophisticated. There were so many times that I would get stuck and tell myself, well, maybe the skills don't apply in this situation, but they do. And I was just struggling to find the way to apply them correctly and find which skill to apply, because sometimes I would apply the wrong ones in the wrong place. So this um, that group really, really helped me with that, and that was how I was able to get over that hump. And now I just feel a lot more secure and a lot more confident in using the skills on my own.
Wow. So, how did you use the group? Like, how did it support you?
Well, whenever I felt myself going to the bad place in my head and starting to make up stories or just bring up past issues that have no place in my life anymore, I would go on,
Mm.
I would go onto the group and I would tell the ladies, hey, this is where I am right now. Um, any advice? And they would cheer me on and they would tell me what they've been doing in those circumstances, but mostly just getting that support from people that know exactly what I'm doing, because most people don't. Um, they're wonderful, but if they don't understand what you're doing, they can think you're kind of, I don't know how to say it, but they'll just tell you advice that goes totally against it and can put you back on the wrong track.
Like, lock them out,
So
right? Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
So it was great to just stay positive and stay on the right track, and it really helped keep me there. And then, of course, I remember the first month that I was in the group, you had a live class that was specifically about dealing with needless emotional turmoil, which is exactly what I kept falling into. So it was so, so helpful. And I just took so many notes. And whenever I feel myself going down that again, I pull out my notebook and I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And it helps every time. It really does. And even there's so many little things that I had in the past felt resentful about, that the skills have given me the tools not just to learn how to tolerate those things, but to actually appreciate them. For example, my husband spoils our kids. He had a really awful childhood. It was a lot of neglect and a lot of abuse. Um, so his children are his opportunity to, or rather, he wants to give them everything he didn't have. So he gives them everything. And that used to, in the past, really bug me because I'd say, oh my gosh, we're going to have some spoiled kids. He comes home with gifts every day. But now with the skills and just focusing on gratitude, I have come to love that about him. Like, wow, he loves our kids this much. They feel so secure and so loved. How lucky am I? Why would I ever have thought that was a bad thing? So yeah, it's just helped me really, really appreciate my life and appreciate that I have him in it.
It sounds like he's a super generous man, and you're so appreciative of that. So
Very. Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful. Well, Lucia, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself from before, what do you think you would tell yourself?
Oh boy. I think I would remind myself that we all have blind spots, and there's a lot of advice bouncing around out there. And so much of it is good meaning, well meant. Um, but you've said it time and time again, and it's so true. Only take advice from someone that is where you want to be in the future. If it's someone that's really struggling also, or um, you know, I always joke because I have three younger sisters that I adore, and I use them as like my venting a lot. But one of my sisters is really young. She's 10 years younger than me, and she's not married. And in the past, I used to come to her for advice, and she'd laugh and say, I'm not even married. Why are you asking me? And she'd be like, I don't even have a boyfriend. What are you asking me? So, yeah, I think I just remind myself that it's so important to find someone that can be a role model that you trust. And if you don't have someone like that in your life, then Laura Doyle should be that person, because the books and the podcast and everything are so inspiring, and really, really, the skills are 1000% true. They really are.
Mhm. Beautiful. Well, I give you all the credit for also bringing the courage and the commitment, Lucia. You did a beautiful job, really transforming your family and creating. It sounds like your kids have a real home court advantage that they wouldn't have had if you hadn't changed the course that you were on. So
I
I
think
really,
so. It's my biggest pride. I get to look at my kids and say, "Oh, they're lucky."
yeah, it is. It's like a big accomplishment, right? To have a happy family is not this. I mean, I think a lot of accomplishments, sometimes we focus on like you made a lot of money or you advanced in your career, right? And I just think this is also a huge accomplishment. Those are too, but this is a really big one. So it sounds like you are enjoying the fruits of your labor, like the focus that you brought to making your family wonderful.
Yes, very much
Mhm.
so.
And what's your best tip for a woman who's listening and he's also coming home late and spending too much and he's drinking with female coworkers and she feels like he's flirting with other women and she wants to have what you have where he comes home and you sit on the couch and cuddle and he just is bringing you gifts, paintings because he is thinking about you and bringing the children gifts because he's so crazy about them too. So if she wants to create what you have, where should she start? What should she do?
Well, I would definitely start with letting go of the idea that you have the responsibility to, or even the ability to control anyone else, and in particular, your husband. You can't do it. And the more that you try, the farther away you'll get from him. So I would start there, realizing that you can control no one but yourself. And secondly, and coming off of that same branch, since you can control yourself, why not start with some self care? That's where I would start. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of described yours earlier. You would have a cup of tea or do some yoga and just kind of get yourself happy. And you went from working 6 days plus to just working those 3 half days. So you gave yourself a lot more time for Lucia. It sounds like.
Yes, exactly. And kids, they'll keep you busy, but I
Yeah.
love it. I love being home with them. Yeah.
So you're living the dream now.
Yes, I am. I can say that absolutely.
Well, congratulations. I give you so much credit for creating that outcome. This could have ended very, very differently.
Yes.
And yeah, so I just think you're amazing. Well
Oh, thank
done. And
Oh,
thank
I
you.
had
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
I was just gonna say I had, one more little story I almost left out. I had told him for so long, "You're never gonna go back to your home country alone," because so many friends had told me to, "Oh, men, when they go alone, they just wanna, go and be bad, so never allow your husband to go alone." And I told him that so many times, he never even tried. But this past Easter, his my sister-in-law and I got together and gifted him a ticket to go visit his family, and I I feel like that was a moment for me to just bask in how far I've come,
Yes.
that I could just really let go and let him go. And I didn't just let him go, but I actually took the time to enjoy my time alone with the kids, and I saw friends, and yeah, I just really basked in that moment of realizing, wow, he's going alone to his country and I am fine. I trust him. I know that he is visiting family. I'm not making up stories in my head. I was just completely fine. And couldn't even believe it. He was so shocked. And of course, he was sending me pictures and videos and talking to me, and he was just so happy. And he had a great time. So, yeah,
Wow.
that's how far I've come.
That is how far you've come, and it's almost like a living apology in a way, right? Because for the years that you were
Yes,
saying, "I'm not going to let you do this," or "You're never going to your country by yourself." This was you saying, "You know what? I apologize for that, and I do trust you." And it sounds like he's really living up to your trust.
yes, completely, yes.
Well, what a great example of how, like, trust is something you give. It was less about him, I guess, earning it, and more about you deciding that you really trusted him.
Right. Yep. I would say that.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and all the details and the way that you did it, right? Because I think there's so many women listening thinking, how can I do it? And Lucia, you've done it and you described those steps. And that is just so valuable. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. It was such an honor and so fun to chat with you.
If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. And now it's time for the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week Award.
It's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice. Yeah, it's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice of the week.
The advice that I find most ghastly this week is from a courageous, committed student who heard a politician talking about marriage say, if one part wants out, then that is just what has to happen. And you just have to respect the wishes your partner has. And he said it so matter-of-factly, like this is just how it is and everybody knows it. This student who sent me this worst advice nominee, which I so appreciate and thank you for, wrote, for me, it just gave me a knot in my stomach, reliving how helpless and alone and desperate I felt, having no choice, nothing to say in the matter, when my husband said he had decided to divorce me. Because I thought it was like this politician said. I thought there was nothing to do but respect it. My husband didn't want to work on our relationship, was knee-deep somewhere else, and I started paving the way, all the while being a needy, desperate, sad heap. Then, she says, I found you and the 6 intimacy skills. I'm so grateful you went ahead with making the knowledge you gained public so I and thousands of others could find it. You saved me. And she signs off by saying, my miracle is coming. So you see why I say this student is so courageous, right? Here, the illusion in her marriage was that it was over. There was nothing she could do. And even her political leader was reinforcing this idea that if someone wants out of a marriage, there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to accept it. But she's no longer buying it. Imagine the determination and commitment it took for her to turn away from that illusion and decide to bring her focus and her influence and her power to the purpose of fixing her marriage. Imagine how much self-control it took for her to be dignified instead of terrified, and to make herself happy instead of being needy. Isn't it inspiring when you see a woman choose her faith over her fear? This reminds me of the Serenity Prayer, which is about desiring the courage to change the things I can. The courage to change the things I can. And yes, to accept the things I cannot change, the serenity to accept the things I can't change, but also change the things I can, even if things look hopeless, even if it's scary. That's the definition of courage. Not that you don't feel afraid, but you just keep going anyway. So much of life is about how you show up, about your attitude, your humility, your courage. And as women, my experience is that we can move mountains without moving a muscle if we use our own gifts, the gifts of the feminine. And that is not just about sexuality. It's about all of our gifts as women. And from the stories I get to hear from the students in the Ridiculously Happy Wife program and in relationship coach training and on this podcast every week, I am utterly convinced that having the courage to stand for your own marriage is how miracles begin. Because to paraphrase Thomas Wolfe, miracles not only happen around here, they happen all the time. But they can't happen if you just give up. I believe every marriage is worth fighting for, no matter how dark or hopeless it seems. Marriages are born out of optimism and hope and love. And those are characteristics I want to cultivate in myself and in the world. That's who I want to be. And that's who this student is deciding to be too. And it just makes my day to hear about her hope and her awareness of her own influence to make her marriage playful and passionate again, even though it seems completely hopeless. I've seen this movie before, and I got to tell you, I just love the ending. Who doesn't love seeing love win? For that reason, this advice that if one part of the marriage wants out, then that is just what has to happen, and you just have to respect the wishes your partner has. That's the very worst relationship advice I've heard all week. Thanks for sending me the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award winner. If you see terrible relationship advice and you want to contribute to this podcast, send it to me at laura@lauradoyle.org. That's laura@lauradoyle.org. Listen and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Next week, we'll talk about how to stop resenting your husband in 3 simple steps. In the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that with my state finally opening up, I'm thinking about dressing up again and maybe even adding accessories. And I don't just mean socks.